Hello, I'm here to talk about the neuroscience of mindfulness and why it matters for Montessorians. So mindfulness is trained, non-judgmental awareness. This is a fun little cartoon that you're going to live in the moment unless the moment's really tricky and then you'll have a cookie, right? No, that's not what mindfulness is about. Mindfulness is about being with whatever is happening at that moment, good, bad, or ugly, okay? It's noticing anything, even if your head is full, even if your head is bored, no matter what's happening. If you're uncomfortable, your back hurts, noticing it without reactivity. And it's actually not about self-torture, right? It's not about sitting there saying, okay, oh shoot, I'm thinking again, oh that's bad. No, it's not about that. We don't want to beat ourselves up no matter what's happening. Even if we have, what's known as monkey mind, right? We're going to accept it. That's how it is. We're not going to get all cranky with ourselves because of it. And it's not the same as relaxation, right? We're not just there to chill out and go zen and fall asleep. It actually takes a lot of effort. And you can see this picture. It's from a New York Times article about this very topic. And the man on the left is trying very hard to do nothing while the man on the right is just, on his phone, right? Defaulting onto his phone. Our brain actually uses a lot of energy when it's doing nothing. Our overall energy consumption only increases by about 5% when we're on task versus when we're off task. And there are many types of mindfulness practices, okay? There are formal ones and there are informal ones. We're going to focus mostly on formal ones today. And you can watch this great little video of my son giving you instruction on how to meditate. There are many places on the internet you can find some basic breathing practice instructions. And the basic overall intention is to be quiet, take a respectful, strong position, not too tight, not too loose, and be still. Notice what's happening, but try to maintain the majority of your attention on the sensation of breathing as that breath comes in and goes out. And it can be helpful to notice the sensation of air right here below your nose. When we do this, there are a lot of changes that happen in our body. Our heart rate gets lowered, our blood pressure goes down, and even our cortisol levels go down. But our oxygen saturation goes up. And we actually are toggling off our default mode network, okay? And we're toggling on and off. We're going to talk about that more in a few minutes. We move from beta to alpha wave activity in the anterior cingulate cortex and the striatum. Okay, all right, lots of neuroscience gobbledygook, don't worry about it. The point is we're moving to a different type of energy level, of rate, a frequency of the energy that's going through our brain. And here's some those are fun, right? Now you can see what they look like on an EEG. And we also decrease the activity in our amygdala. Now you probably know that the amygdala is kind of the fear, one of the many areas in the brain that deal with fear, but it's kind of a key area for fear. There's other things that happen too. Generally, we rev up a lot of activity without mindfulness, and when we have mindfulness, we rev it down or balance it out, right? So we increase our activity in the amygdala in particular, some thalamus cortical activity, but just basically excitatory, overall a little more agitated or excited, right? Elevated, all right? Increased in our default mode activity, which is basically not paying attention so much to what we're doing, just kind of spinning our wheels, right? Or just going on autopilot, not really paying attention to how we're focusing our attention. We have unsynchronized cardiac and respiratory systems. We have increased sympathetic activity in our nervous system. But that decreases after mindfulness practice. We actually have decreased sympathetic activity, increased parasympathetic activity. We have decreased amygdala activity. We have decreased baseline thalamocortical activity, decreased default mode network activity, right? So there's this kind of balance, this settling down after mindfulness practices. Now, I'd love to hear from you and think about if you've ever had a transformative experience meditating, like this guy in the cartoon, right? Had this transformative, had reached total enlightenment and serenity in that moment, and then lost it completely when the light turned green, right? These can be transient experiences, but you may have also had an uncomfortable experience meditating. They're both possible. It can be unpleasant even if it's good for us, right? So you see all this stuff, we should really be meditating, but maybe you sit down and it's really not feeling good. You may be more aware of things that were always there, but you didn't notice as much before because you were just busy with other things. Your mind was focused on different things. And now your mind settles and you notice some things that it may be very difficult to notice. The intention of this is not to make yourself go nuts. It's to notice to the degree that you can and not to torture yourself. So if it's too uncomfortable, you stop and then you start again another time and you try again. You slowly increase until it's tolerable. And it can take a long time or it can be quick. We're all quite different. And even some people, if they have certain circumstances in their life, meditation can trigger some really significant negative events. That's uncommon. It's really uncommon, although it is possible if you have this kind of trifecta of other factors before you start meditating. The key to remember is that brains are like faces. No two are exactly alike. So just because, your friend or your partner has X experience meditating and you might have Y experience meditating, they don't have to be the same. The progression generally brings you to a similar place over time. The amount of time it takes can be quite variable. Okay, so here's our first quiz. Meditation decreases our heart rate and blood pressure while increasing our oxygen saturation. True or false? True or false? The answer is true. That's right. We get some good benefits to our heart rate and blood pressure and oxygen just from a little meditation. Next question. If you don't feel great when you're meditating, you're doing it wrong. True or false? The answer is false. Meditation can be physically and emotionally uncomfortable. It is the act of noticing without reacting to all experiences that brings benefit. All right, now there are 3 key brain networks we're going to talk about when we think about meditation. One is the default mode network, and that's what we're doing when we're not intentionally doing anything, when we're kind of off task, our mind is just wandering, we're daydreaming. That's default mode, okay? Then there's the Salience network. And the Salience network is kind of when we notice, we're kind of daydreaming and we really wanted to be doing something else. Or we notice that we're trying to make sense of something and make meaning and understand it. That's Salience network. And then the network that everyone talks about is the central executive network, our higher executive functions, planning, maintaining attention on a task, thinking, okay? That's executive. Now, why this matters is because in mindfulness practices, we're exercising these networks, right? And here's how it works. We focus on the object of the practice. Typically, that's the breath. So you focus your attention on the experience of the breath. That's your central executive network because you're focusing your attention. Then our mind, at some point, the mind will wander. It's true. It doesn't mean you failed when your mind wanders. That's normal. Okay, the mind will wander, and that is the default mode network kicking in. Okay, defaulting. Then at some point, we become aware that our mind has wandered. We're like, oh, wait a minute. I didn't even notice if I breathed at all. Okay, that is the Salience network, noticing what's going on. And so we say, okay, I got to turn my attention back to what I was doing, turn my attention back to breathing and shifting it back. Okay, that again is your central executive network coming back into play. And you can see that all of these networks are working together continually, right? Executive turns us on, we pay attention, and we lose our attention, our mind wanders, Salience notice it, we pull ourselves back with central executive. It's this constant practice. It's like push-ups, right? It's like doing the cardio route or something in the park, right? It's the same procedure. It keeps happening. It keeps happening. Over time, we lose our attention less, but we still will lose it. Sometimes we can maintain our attention for extended periods of time, hours even, okay? It's possible. This occurs generally after long-term experience meditating, years of meditating. The more we do it, the easier it becomes. It can be quite difficult at the beginning, and even with experience, sometimes it's quite difficult. Don't be discouraged. It's typical for that to happen. You're still building up your neural networks, and they're slowly but surely getting stronger. Because this is exercise for the brain. We are invoking experience-dependent plasticity. And there's not only one way to do this, not only one type of meditation. If the point is that you're focusing on a behaviorally relevant stimuli, like the sensation of the breath would be somatosensory, or auditory, could be a sound, it could be a mantra that you're making, okay? And you're doing it repeatedly, right? And then you will see these robust changes in our neural networks, okay? We're practicing directing our attention within a relaxed setting over repeated practice settings where you're not doing anything else. You're not trying to do this while you're, checking your email. That would be a mindfulness practice, not a meditative practice. It's not focused. We need to be able to focus our attention completely when we do these. Now, experience-dependent plasticity means we have to teach the brain to make it change. There are different types of plasticity in the brain. When we're younger, we have effortless plasticity, and that's what this red line is showing you. And this is normally when we're younger, we have tons of effortless activity. We do nothing, and the brain is just changing, okay? But as we get older, we have more effortful plasticity. This is the amount of effort we have to expend in order to make changes in the brain. And this is why with meditation, we can start younger, right? And it can be a benefit to us. The younger we start, the easier it is to adjust the brain. That's why we're so interested in early education interventions, right? Because the young brain, it's effortless for so many things. Or the effort it takes is dramatically less for the child than it would take the adult, which is interesting to think about. Kind of the reverse of what we expect. So here's a quiz. You don't need to start meditating until you're older. True or false? Ready? The answer is false. The younger you start, the easier it is to build strong neural networks. And on the left, I'm showing you this picture of me and my son when he was just a baby. This was in the orphanage in Kazakhstan where I first met him. That was just a couple days after I first met him. And then here he is when he is, I think he was 15 in this picture, 14, meditating. And he's been meditating formally since he was 7, informally before that. And it's made a tremendous difference for him. The younger you start, the easier it is to integrate it into your daily life. Now, mindfulness exercises key areas of the brain, and these areas in red are involved with attention control. Makes sense, right? Central executive. And these areas are involved in emotion regulation. Makes you think of the Salience network, right? We're deciding what's important, what matters, and then where to put our attention. So that's emotion regulation. And also the blue areas are about self-awareness because we're noticing what's happening inside of our bodies, okay? And so all of these together, I know you're thinking, this is social emotional learning, right? This is all about emotional literacy. And that's what meditation is helping us to strengthen our capacity to choose what our emotional states are, where our attention lies, and to not get stuck in the default mode. It's this act of toggling, getting us out of default mode that is so powerful and that has tremendous implications for mental health. Many mental illnesses, we're either stuck in default mode, which can happen in depression, where we're always ruminating and perseverating about something that happened and thinking about it over and over and over and over again. Well, think about it. Anything we do repeatedly in the brain gets more efficient at. So if we're constantly thinking about these unskillful, these negative things, then our brain gets very efficient at thinking about them and it defaults to that. Okay, so it makes it worse and worse and worse. You know, it's the snowball rolling down the hill, getting bigger as it goes. But if we can notice that we're in that mind state, it's not a problem to be thinking about these things. We don't want to pretend that we haven't had difficult experiences. We don't want to suppress. We want to notice it, and then we want to make meaning of it. We want to pull it into salience and decide, how can we have agency about this? How can we get into the central executive? How can we take action to affect something positive change? So we're moving, we're toggling out of that default mode, making a decision that this is not what's in our best interest. We need to make meaning of it, we need to make sense of it, and then we need to turn it into something skillful. Okay? In a Montessori classroom, you might think about this of redirecting a child's behavior. If you notice a child is having difficulty, you acknowledge the difficulty, and then you say, come with me, and you redirect them to something more skillful that would be useful for them in that moment. We don't sit there and perseverate or lecture, we redirect. That's why Montessori teachers are called guides instead of teachers. So meditation is training self-regulation, and there are these 3 key areas I want you to look at: attention control, emotion regulation, and self-awareness. We just saw all of that in those areas of the brain. This is a different study pointing to the same thing, okay? And these are the foundations for self-regulation, which is huge in early childhood, right? We're like, oh, he doesn't have self-regulation. He's running around and he's always poking everybody, or, he's getting in everybody's space, right? Or he's just blurting things out. No inhibitory control, doesn't have self-regulation, has developing executive functions, not developed. Meditation practices can help that develop. And as I mentioned earlier, when you first are starting out, it's effortful. It's not necessarily easy. It can be quite challenging to start and uncomfortable. As you do more and more, it gets less, it takes less effort to reduce your mind wandering. And in the advanced stage, it's pretty effortless. You can slip in when you need to. Once your salience network kicks in and says, oops, I should shift, you can. You have that capacity to do so. And again, this is with practice, strengthening those networks. And this, think about it, self-regulation, this is about normalization, isn't it? It's about noticing what's going on. It's about being able to take agency and action and place your attention where you want to be. Okay, this is related to normalization. So when we say in Montessori speak, we say normalization. In common speak, in the rest of the world speak, we say self-regulation, right? Or optimal development. Okay. And it does get easier. Don't forget. Don't get discouraged. Okay, so by exercising this salience network, we may be actually protecting against mental illness. And this alludes to what I spoke to before about depression, but also I didn't mention about psychosis. Oftentimes when there's psychosis, we can be, or in mania, we can be completely in action, central executive, and kind of action, and not toggling out of that. We all have external attention with no internal attention. We actually need both, don't we? Because that's how our bodies are. We're reflecting and making meaning all the time. And that's really where the beauty of life comes out, when we understand what its value is, what it means to us. And this meaning making is actually happening in our Salience network. I'll speak just for a moment about some research by Mary Helen Imordino Yang, who's at the University of Southern California, San Diego. She's an extraordinary researcher. Her name's on this slide. Look her up. You'll just go crazy. Some of her papers are heavy, but some of them are quite accessible. And she's done a lot of work with adolescents on meaning making. And the meaning making when they are looking at, say, a video of difficult situation, like a video of a young girl in Afghanistan who, after the Taliban was back in charge and wanted to go to medical school. She had dreamed of becoming a doctor, and then she was not allowed to go to school. And the children, the teenagers, watch this video, and they're like, oh my goodness. They report back how terrible this is and exactly what the events were that it was. And then some of the teens take it beyond that. And they think about, but this should really be different. We should do something about this. So what is happening right there? That's salience. They're noticing that something should be different, okay? They want to adjust. They want to shift. And from there, then there's a possibility of stepping into, well, what could we do? How could we affect change in this situation? Now, Mary Helen looked at these adolescents' brains at this first moment when they did this, and then 2 years later, they repeated it with different scenarios. And they saw a robust difference in certain areas of the brain involved in the salience network. And those areas were much stronger, much thicker. The gray matter was thicker. And the students who were able, the teens who were able to really make meaning and go into the action phase, to jump, to toggle out of default mode, go through meaning making and saliency and step into action. And that study is referenced on this, a write-up and accessible. You can read this and understand it, the one that's referenced on the bottom of this slide. So the point is that the areas that are getting strengthened are the areas that are at risk in PTSD. So if we strengthen our saliency network, are we reducing our risk of mental illness? And the preliminary data is very strongly suggesting yes, that's the case. So this is for our future health and for our children's future health, particularly with the mental health crisis we see in our country today. So meditation can also specifically target unskillful emotions. It doesn't have to just be focus on the breath and an intentional awareness practice, although it can just be that, and that is incredibly beneficial. It can also be specifically focused on trying to draw your attention to something that you experience and help you learn to address it differently. So here you take a comfortable seated position and you breathe naturally and do nothing. Do this for a few minutes, and then you remember an incident that made you angry. You allow yourself to feel the anger. Remember, we're not judging, we're allowing it to feel it, not overwhelm us. Notice it as much as you can, right? And then you have these angry thoughts, and then you turn your attention to the soles of your feet. Turn all of your attention to the soles of your feet. Move your toes, feel your shoes. right? Or feel your feet on the floor. And keep breathing naturally and focus on the soles of your feet until you feel calm. So you can see that this would train you. This would train you to redirect your attention to something else when you're feeling emotion. And you just dip your toe into the emotion to the degree that you can. Comfortably. Maybe not comfortably, but to the degree that you can, and still be able to shift back out of it. Remember that once you're calm, you can walk away. And that's our goal, isn't it? We want to have choice. We want to have control. We don't want to be subject to our emotions. We don't want to be always reactive. We want to be proactive. We want to be able to make choices. And this is the power of meditation. It lets us choose where we put our attention, right? When we're in difficult circumstances, attentional choice may be less accessible. If you're in a very high trauma situation, if you're in a war situation, if you're in a high violent area, if your home is full of aggression, it can be difficult to access the capacity to make choice. But even in those situations, you can strengthen your salience network by meditative practices, okay? Every situation is actually workable. So think about this in the classroom. Where do we want to put our attention, right? Look at the joy. She's doing some orange juicing. He's cutting an apple next to her. They're like so happy, right? But she also accidentally has her tray on top of a book, right? And this is like, oh no, she's damaging the book, right? Okay, but where do we put our attention? Do we allow the joy to continue and wait until a neutral moment to maybe just quietly move the book out of harm's way without saying anything? Or do we interrupt? So we want to be able to choose. We don't want to be reactive and like, damaging the book, grab that book. Okay, no. We want to be able to choose the right moment to act. And this is related to our negativity bias, okay? We do have a negativity bias. You can read more about it from Norris as listed on this slide, where we tend to notice and remember negative things because they were more important to our survival. They are more important to our survival. We have to pay attention to them so we can respond and keep ourselves safe. This matters, okay? But noticing the positive, trying to cultivate an optimism bias is really important for our thriving. And meditation can help us attend to the positive. Okay, now mindfulness also buffers stress, and you can start to see how this would work, but I'm just going to quickly review some stress points for you. So typically when we're just in a typical moment, like now you're watching this, hopefully you're not stressed out, right? You're just chilling, but you're paying attention. So we have a lot of prefrontal network activity. Now just remember, you need your whole brain to do anything, okay? But this is a little more pronounced activities in the prefrontal cortex. That's what PFC stands for. Okay, this is an alert, calm state. When we have an acute stress response, somebody corrects us, somebody says, hey, watch out, okay? Right? That activity changes, it moves from our PFC into our fight or flight response area, into our amygdala, our emotional response areas, okay? So we lose access, physically lose access to those higher thinking areas when we're in an acute stress response, right? So an acute stress response, do you think this is a teachable moment, right? If you've lost access to the front of your brain because someone's just like, you totally messed up. Now, blah, 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 blah. And here's what you did wrong, right? Right, because it's blah, blah, blah. Nobody knows what you're saying because they don't have access to the frontal part of their brain, right? Okay. Mindfulness can buffer our acute stress response, so it's less likely that we default into an acute stress response. It gives us that choice. Again, choice. We notice, and then we can choose. So what does this mean? Let's think about this in terms of mental health. Does this mean it's okay to lose our temper with mindful people? No, right? No, because they have better control, so they'll be okay if we lose it, right? Or if you lose your temper, are you a mindfulness failure? No, it's a process, right? It's just a process. Don't beat yourself up. The point is not to beat yourself up. The point is non-judgmental awareness. The point is to notice and then make meaning and then take action. So should we mandate meditation? Should this be required, right? Just like literacy, all the rules about literacy and whatever you have to read at the moment? Or if someone experiences health challenges, is it really their fault because they haven't meditated enough, right? Is it that kind of a responsibility that we have, that if we get sick, it's really just because we haven't done enough in our well-being to protect ourselves? No. There's always an environmental component and a genetic component to any health situation, to any mental health situation. We are variable from day to day, from person to person, right? From moment to moment. Humans are diverse, beautifully so, which means we each have different strengths, we have different challenges, and those can change from day to day, okay? So remember, again, this is not a beat yourself up prophecy. This is a strengthen your networks So there's some things that you can do informally throughout the day to help with mindfulness. You can choose a repetitive action that you do several times a day, like washing your hands, walking up the stairs, okay, brushing your teeth once a day. Anything that you do a few times a day or even once a day, that you can just turn all of your attention to the somatosensory experience of that activity, okay? Completely. So you just drop thinking, drop it, and turn your attention. That's training you to have that capacity to choose where you put your attention, all right? Don't label, just feel. And that's a little gift for you. Now I want to leave you with this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. When we learn to stop, we begin to see. And when we see, we understand. Peace and happiness are the fruit of that. In order to be with our friend, a flower, or our coworkers, we need to learn the art of stopping. And that, I think, is really what Salience is. That's what mindfulness is about. It's about strengthening that capacity to be in charge of our own actions, reactions, and being able to pause so that we can choose rather than being dragged around. So I hope this was helpful. If you're able, you should take a moment to just write down a little bit to help consolidate your own memory. Pause and write down these things. 3 things you didn't know before this began, 2 things you'd like to continue to learn more about, and 1 thing you might want to change because of what you just learned. And now I'll just show you some references for this talk in case you want to go deeper on anything. Thank you for listening. I hope it's helpful.